Welcome back. This will be part 11 in the character rigging tutorial series. So this video will describe the two different ways that we can paint the skin weights in order to refine or correct the way the skin weights affect the body. The first method is, if I go back to, with the geometry selected, back to the paint skin weights tool in the option box, is to try to find the troublesome areas, like the hip is moving too much of the torso, and then try to correct over the existing paint skin weights. The second method I'll come back to at the end of this video is I'm just going to completely remove the skin weights, flood my skin weights for my torso, my pelvis, slowly add the skin weights to manually to the other joints. So this method, first method, is just going to take the existing skin weights and refine them. You're welcome to choose either way. It's whichever way you're more comfortable with. But the first way has some advantages. The second way has advantages as well. So what we need to do first is move a joint and see how that joint is affecting the body. Okay. So overall, it's doing a pretty good job. If I look at the crotch area, blending that. If I look at the back area, it's blending that pretty good, but it's just moving too much of the torso, the upper pants, and then even to the shirt area. So here's how I suggest allowing yourself to paint skin weights in the most successful way. Let me close my tool setting. We're going to create some test animations here, and we want to create test animations that try out the range of motion of this joint. So we're going to go joint by joint and painting the skin weights, correcting the skin weights for each major joint that we have errors with. And you should do this for every joint of the body. So the first major area I know I'm going to have to correct is my hips. Another major area is the shoulders. Another major area are the neck joints. Okay. Much of the rest of the body should do a pretty good job. If I look at my spine here, it's doing an alright job. It's moving too much of the lower area. Try this one. That one's doing pretty good. Moving a little bit too much to the lower area, so we'll come back and correct some of those as well. But we know we need to correct the hips, the neck, and the shoulders. Then we'll come back and refine the other ones as well. So we're going to do a range of motion test animations here. So down in my timeline, as default, I have 120 frames visible in my visible timeline, and that's really all I need for test animations. What I'm going to do is go joint to joint, create a range of motion test animations for this hip joint, correct the skin weights for this hip joint, remove those test animation keyframes, and then move on to the next joint. So this process is how this can be helpful and streamlined of how to paint your skin weights. All right, so we need to test out our range of motion for our hip. So I'm going to select my hip joint, and on frame 0 or 1, I'm going to hit the S key. The S key is how we create a keyframe for any kind of object. I'm going to move about 20 frames forward, and I'm going to get my rotate tool and rotate my leg forward enough so I can see what the body's going to be doing as I'm blending and deforming that part of the body. So let's hit the S key, and then maybe 20 more frames later, I want to rotate the hip back the opposite way, relatively testing how much that joint would naturally bend. So that way I have a couple of test keyframes, rotating the leg forward, rotating the leg back. Maybe I can go back and what I can do is copy my keyframe on 0 over to frame 60 maybe. So that puts it right back down to the base position, or bind pose position. Now 20 more frames later, I can rotate my hip out to see what kind of range of motion I can get there. Maybe I will copy and paste my down position again. And then I'm not going to be able to push it too much, but maybe I'll rotate it in some. So that way I can see my relatively, all of my range of motion. Now I'm missing a couple, which is my twist. So let's copy this frame over, and I just moved my timeline to the left and right. So that way I can add more frames. Now I can try twist. So I can say rotate the hip outward this way, and then maybe 20 more frames, rotate the hip inward that way. So that way I can now see, if I hit play, what my body will do when my hip will do all of its range of motion there. Range of motion is what that joint or that body part can do in all axes. So that shows you it's doing a pretty good job with the lower leg as it connects to the body, but it's just moving way too much of the midsection. So what we're going to do is make sure that we have the body selected, and we go ahead and create test range of motion keyframes. And then now with our paint skin weights tool, I can come in here and refine the skin weights. Okay, so I can see that my body is moving too much when this hip joint moves. So this first process is to refine the current skin weights that are created with the skin tool. Now here's the key thing: we do not want to replace or remove skin weights from the hip joint. Instead, what we're going to do is I need to remove the weight from the hip on the upper body. So instead of removing it from the hip, I'm actually going to go to the pelvis, and then if I move my hip joints up, my pelvis and spine 1. So I'm actually going to be adding the weight back to the pelvis joint and spine 1 joint. I never remove weight. I'm going to add the weight to the joint that it needs to be added on. So this first process is going to, I know I need to add weight back to the hip or the pelvis and then back to the spine. So I'm not going to remove it from the hip. I'm going to go to the pelvis, and then we will try to add a value of 1 to kind of clear out some of that weight for this top pants line that I don't want it to move with the hip. So I'm going to drag over that center pants line. I have my hip or my pelvis joint selected, not my hip, and I'm only going to focus on one side of the body. So I dragged in there and adjusted that pelvis line, pants line for the pelvis. Let's do it on the inside there. You might have to go at some specific angles to correct like some of these inside vertices. There you go. But now, if I play my timeline, you can see it's no longer affecting those areas of the body. Now you can already see where some issues are going to happen with this first method, because now I got some weird tweaking and blending going on. Now what I really need to do is kind of go on the inside of the body here and make sure that my body is not moving those inside faces. Okay? So this is the difficult part when you have geometry that's pretty close to each other here. So I need to go in here, remove the weight as it gets really close to some of those vertices there. And slowly, it's not going to affect those areas. Okay. So the first method is refining the weight of the vertices by adding the weight to the proper joint. So I went to another loop above that. There we go. Do all of this over here. And then now if I move that, it's no longer going to affect those joints. Okay. So I can add a value of, like, say, 0.3. And I do want this area to blend a little more, so let's kind of blend that back out. There you go. Maybe I'll add a value of 0.1 now, and I'm still in my pelvis. And I'm trying to blend this back so that way when the leg bends forward, it's not going to be popping this geometry as much, crunching that geometry in there as much there. There you go. So that's getting better. There's other areas that need correcting, like this right here. You see some of that pinching as well. With a low value, 0.1, we can slowly start to add more weight back to the pelvis. And you'll see them kind of pop back to their original position. So that's why with a low value, that's really helpful. So this is okay, but it's very time consuming to go through here, correct one joint, and then go to the next joint. So here's where the next process is going to come in handy. So that works, but it takes some time to refine that. The other method is, yes, we have everything skinned, but we're actually going to the second step process is within the skin weights. So like the pelvis, and we're going to choose a value of 1 and choose flood. Okay, so what that does is that removes the skin weight for all other joints. Okay. So if I come over here and try to rotate my arm, it does not move the arm anymore. Okay, I'm doing this on purpose though. The reason I'm doing that is so that way I can manually come in here and paint the skin weights of how I want them to be. So now if I roll my timeline, my animation for my hip is still there, but it's not affecting my geometry anymore because I've flooded my pelvis with a value of 100, which means the pelvis is affecting every vertex 100%. All the rest of the joints are affecting every vertex 0%. So now what I do when I go select the hip, the left hip, is everything is black. So what that means is with a value of 0.1, I can come over here with the hip and start to manually add weight for my hip. Okay. So typically what I will do is the lower half of the leg. Let's get some loops around the hip area created. And then we will, so I have a value of 0.1 and I'm painting on the areas that I want this hip to affect. There you go. So I want to affect kind of this area right there. So that way when my body moves, you can start to see it's moving some of that geometry now. This method, I'm manually painting on all the weight. So what I'll typically do is I'll go a value of 1 and I'll flood that entire leg down here. Okay, so down lower, I'm going to flood that entire leg. I'm not flooding every vertex here, but I'm painting a value of 1 all the way down to the bottom of the leg. All the way down here. Make sure that we're getting all of these vertices inside. I may have missed a little bit in here. There you go. So now with the skin weights, if I scrub my timeline, you can see it's moving a lot of the lower leg. But now I just need to go back with a value of 0.2 or 0.3, let's try 0.3, and slowly start to add more weight for this upper leg area. Okay, so we'll continue adding weight slowly. And scrubbing back and forth. There you go. So it's starting to push and pull those areas more. So this method can be more successful. Either way, you're going to have to spend some time painting skin weights. So that's a pretty good start. Moving a lot of the leg how we want it to. We got some pinching going on that we need to correct. There we go. Maybe that's too much there. So put a value of 0.1. Come back and blend some of these other vertices above that. So we need to add some more blending, maybe even to the crotch area some. We do want that to blend and move a little bit. There we go. So that way those kind of middle crotch vertices will move somewhat, but just not completely. So either way, you'll have to come in here and kind of correct and blend the skin weights. Kind of move over to the butt area as well. So I'm going to blend, so we need some more skin weighting down here. So blend that a little more. There you go. Keep adding more weight to that loop there. All right, pull it back so we can kind of blend more of this. There we go, starting to get a little bit more natural blending in that body part there. Got some pinching we need to correct here, so let's go back to maybe flood 1. And my brush size. Yeah, maybe we can paint it back here, that would be easier. There you go. All right, that corrected that. All right, so this idea is flooding the pelvis with a value of 1 and then going back to each joint. So the next thing I would do is I would go down to the knee and I would say with a value of 1 I'm going to flood or paint a value of 1 all the way down to the rest of the leg. Okay, and then I'm going to blend it back where that knee meets the upper leg. Okay, so we'll come in here, we'll keep blending. Here we go. Make sure we get all those bottom vertices. I'm going to turn off my grid because that's kind of in the way. There we go. All right, so the next step would be coming here to the knee joint and testing out how that knee would blend as well. So those are the two different methods. We can first just start with the skin weights that the skin tool gives us and try to correct those skin weights, or we can flood our entire body so that the pelvis affects the entire body, and then go back to each joint and slowly add the weights for those specific joints. Either way, it is kind of a time-consuming process, but it's a necessary process if you want the joints to affect the body properly. In order to refine the skin weights for the entire joint system. So next couple of videos we're going to talk about the individual body parts and how to correct the skin weights for those body parts to finalize the way the body moves when certain joints animate.